our final talk during this morning session. It will be given by Dr. Dmitry Volkov. He is co-director and one of the founders of the Center for the Consciousness Studies at the Moscow State University. And his topic as a philosopher has been a philosophy of consciousness. Somebody will help you. He made his PhD in the analysis of the particular Western philosopher Daniel Dennett on the consciousness, and he wrote a book about this. And later on, recently, he completed his habilitation degree, which is on the issues of free will and moral responsibility. And Dmitry has been also very active in organizing the contacts between the Russian philosophers and Western analytical philosophers. He organized visits of a number of outstanding Western philosophers of consciousness to Russia and a number of international meetings in this respect. So, Dmitry, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I would like to talk about some of the issues that everybody is concerned, probably. It's the issue of self. So, one of the main issues discussed in the contemporary analytic philosophy today, and in Russian analytic philosophy in particular, is the problem of personal identity. So this problem of personal identity consists in two main big questions. One question is what is self? And the other question is how do we know and how can we identify a person at one particular time with a person in some other time? So the interest to this issue was recently propelled by some new discussions in neuroscience and also in some developments on artificial intelligence, which widen our understanding of the mind and the brain. So both philosophers and scientists are working on these issues, but the interest is also supported or justified by some very important concerns of every day. For instance, how do we find somebody responsible for an action? So imagine I did some action in the past, and maybe it was a wrong, immoral action. So a few months later, you find out that I did something wrong, and you blame me for this. You say, Dmitry is responsible for doing something in the past. That means that you have identified me today with me in the past. I can also blame myself and say, I think I did something wrong. I did an immoral action. So I blame myself. So I also can identify myself now with somebody in the past. So how do I do this? It's a big question. And also maybe for Buddhists, there's another very big question is, okay, so I am a reincarnation of some other Lama or some other person. Now, how do I identify with this person? What are the reasons that are justifying the identification of one person with another? So maybe Buddhists have this special concern. But maybe the answer to this question is very simple. Maybe we know it as a fact. Maybe it is obvious. But I think contemporary philosophers and scientists think that this is not very obvious. And there are two reasons for this. Well, first reason is persons are not unified agents. So person and personal brain, the brain of a human resembles a society made out of separate modules that have their cognitive functions. It's composed of multiple modules which execute a discrete cognitive function, relatively autonomous from one another. Well, to cite one of the leading neuroscientists, He's saying human brain has a variety of widely distributed nonverbal systems that are nonetheless able to produce and control behavior. These behaviors are observed by a speaking part of the brain in the left hemisphere as an interpreted. So if one module So if one module produces a strange behavior, the other modules are rationalizing to explain it. So we see this in neural syndromes such as anosognosia, which is a class of mental illnesses which is accompanied by the denial of illness, and in the split brain patients. But we also see this in the normal brain. The brain can be viewed as a set of multiple agents who are retrospectively rationalizing about each other's behavior. In other words, parts of the brain are telling the stories about the motives of the other parts. The lack of unification and superficial integration, or at least not a complete integration of the brain, poses the first obstacle to personal identification. But there's another one. So persons constantly change. Almost nothing stays constant during the lifespan of a person. For instance, the white blood cells change every an average more than a year. Red blood cells change every more or less 4 or 5 months. The skin cells, they change every 3 or 4 weeks. So the body constantly changes. Out of about 50 to 70 trillion cells that compose our body, everything is changing. So nothing stays constant. What is the basis of identification? And psychological states also change all the time. We experience this and then we experience that, and the experiences go one after another. We change our priorities. We change our values sometimes. We change our personality. We acquire and lose memories. So in these respects, this little child, this adult, and teenager and adult, and an old person, they're very different. What grounds the belief that these are the same people, the same person? Maybe we just feel it inside, that it's the same person? I think that's not the case. Inner states constantly change, leaving nothing but a degrading set of memories. So I'm now here at the conference. I'm experiencing myself here. I can see parts of my body, but I don't have anything in the content that is the content of experiencing myself. And we were talking the other day about this, and some said, we experience self. I don't experience self. I don't know who experiences self and what it is to experience self. It seems that the self is a very, very elusive entity. And it is hard to see it, or it's very difficult to track it from the third-person perspective, but also from the first-person perspective. So Western philosophers developed 3 different approaches to this. They wanted to solve this problem, to identify what is self in different moments. So they came up with 3 solutions. And I think all of them are wrong. So one solution is mental substance approach. What is it, mental substance approach? According to mental substance approach, mental substance approach, what makes one person the same as another at different times is the same soul, or something like a mental substance that stays numerically identical. The soul has multiple different qualities, properties, like mental states and psychological characteristics, but they're not essential for identity because they change all the time. Most lay people in the West think that that is the right theory. However, this approach is vulnerable to philosophical criticism. It is vulnerable to to a principle called the verification principle. And I could go into the details why the verification principle is right, but it's right in a certain way. According to this principle, the statement that has no meaning, no means of verification is a meaningless statement. I think it is possible to show that the statement that I am the same person as I am 10 years ago because I have the same soul, this is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. And the reason why it doesn't is because I would like to give you a thought experiment. So scientists come up with experiments. And scientists come up with experiments. Modern day philosophers come up with thought experiments. So this is the thought experiment. Imagine we are sitting now in this room, and me and Konstantin, we have souls. But suddenly, briefly, our souls change places. So my soul is now in Konstantin's body, and his soul is in my body now. But Konstantin has all his memories still there with his body and with his brain. And all my memories and all my experiences stay with me. We just switched bodies. But Konstantin does not know that that happened. Neither do I. We can all have the souls switching places now, and we would not notice. Because nobody notices this except by the content. So,
가서 풍부를 조심했다 하시. 시도. 원래. So
our souls could change places and nobody would notice. So I think that's absurdity, which leads to the conclusion that this approach is wrong.
Yeah, but that's just a thought experiment.
Of course, but thought experiments can give you very good results. And in science, a lot of the times they also use thought experiments. Albert Einstein was using very, important. Newton was using thought experiments. They proved some very important facts.
But your point is that even if, for the sake of argument, two souls were to switch,
yeah,
the individuals won't feel a difference.
Because
that's the point you're making.
That's the point, because if we take only the soul and leave the memories and personal traits separate, soul is nothing. Now, the bodily approach. So the bodily approach is the second approach, so we need to move to another approach. So according to the bodily approach, what stays the same is the body, is the brain. And maybe it's not the same, but maybe it's continuous. The cells change and they change over time, but it's, so a person at time t is the same as a person at time t, next time. If they're physically continuous, or their brain is physically continuous. Okay, so this is the way we track each other. We don't know anything about our souls, but we track each other by the body. We say, oh, that's the same body. Maybe this is that person, or maybe that's that person. Maybe. Okay, but there's a problem with this. And another thought experiment that shows why it is a problem.
Please do not transplant my brain.
Yes. So over the last 20 or 30 years, you may ask to transplant your brain. I mean, in the 20 or 30 brain. And the reason why is because there's a huge progress in organ transplantation. We developed very important techniques for transplanting livers, lungs, even hearts have been transplanted. And why? Because we have developed very good solutions of ex vivo storage, the storage outside of the body, of the organs. We also developed really good approaches to maintain the immune system response. And we also developed techniques for vascular anastomos, which is the connection of the blood vessels. So it is not impossible to translate a brain at some time. But also we know that the brain is composed of two hemispheres. So it is possible to actually transplant one brain hemisphere. And I would like you to imagine a situation like this. So I have my brain in my skull, and there are two donors, two people. I'm transplanting my left hemisphere into one person, and I'm transplanting my right hemisphere into the other person. Let's call this lefty, and let's call this righty. So now lefty has my left hemisphere, and righty has my right hemisphere. Very nice. I think it would be possible in future, if we connect enough nodes in the brain, and I know they may be skeptical that we will do it tomorrow, maybe we'll do it in 100 years. It doesn't matter for the thought experiment. But these bodies will survive. This is very good. Where am I? I don't know where am I. Am I lefty or am I righty now? In which body am I? So it is a problem because the bodily criterion cannot really explain where I am. So this shows at least that the bodily criterion is insufficient. It doesn't tell us where we are in certain situations. But there's another reason why we need to think that it is wrong. It is the transplantation of a person onto an artificial platform. A lot of Russian scientists and a lot of Russian philosophers as well, and cognitive science, think that it is potentially possible to transplant the person onto an artificial platform, recorded as a software. And some people even think that it will not only possible to simulate the outgoing signals of a human brain, but it will be also possible to actually instantiate, realize a person in that artificial platform. Not today. So I call it uploading mind to a computer. This is like this. My mind is now in the computer. I don't have a body, but I'm still myself. I can still be myself. I can still be a person. So this hypothetical scenario, this thought experiment, shows that maybe my body is not important for personal identity. Maybe it's not has nothing to do with my personality, my being the same person. So we are left with another approach called psychological approach, and most Russian philosophers, according to the survey, and probably philosophers in the West as well, subscribe to the psychological approach. So what it says that the person at time t is the same person as time t1 if a person at that previous moment is psychologically continuous with that person now. By psychological continuity, I mean psychological connectedness, say same body traits, same personality, and also causal connection. I'm sure Buddhists would support this, the causal connection between these psychological traits and values. So this approach avoids at least some type of criticism, at least maybe the bodily the uploading of the body to the computer. This is partially the reason why the majority of Russian philosophers consider psychological criterion as the most promising. However, there's a problem with this approach too. It is vulnerable to the hypothetical case, another thought experiment, of reduplication. What is it? So if you can theoretically copy my psychological traits from one place to another, then as you all know, we can make many copies. We can make many copies of presentation or files. If myself is like a file or a computer software, then we can have many selves. So look at this guy. He's got many other successors. He's one, but now he's all his clones. Okay, there are many people with same psychology now and causally connected with him in some way, and they're all me? This would be strange, right? So I think that the reduplication scenario shows that psychological approach leads to absurdity. So now what am I suggesting? Is there anything to suggest? And I suggest a quite loose concept of personal identity. It's very soft connection. And it's kind of subjective. So my view is, I think it's probably close to something of a Buddhist thought, but for different reasons.
원래
This approach is called the narrative approach. And it is supported by supported by myself and some of my colleagues in the St. Petersburg University. And it shows that a person in two different moments in time should be viewed as two rooms of the same house. Basically, they're not the same, but they relate to each other as parts relate to the whole. In other words, humans have not only spatial parts, or not humans, persons, that's important. Persons not only have spatial parts, I have my spatial parts, but I also have temporal parts. So these temporal parts are connected by a narrative. It's a very loose connection. And the narrative is a story about some agent, his actions and motives, presented in consequential order. It is the story that explains previous events and consequent events and justified by the agent goals, values, and priorities. I'm actually saying that this story is a fiction. It's something we write every day about us. It's like after autobiography. We write it every day. We add some more pages to it. But it's a very loose. We can write one way or another. But I think that that's the best relation we can get. That's the best thing we can actually hope for. So the narrative approach can be traced back to analytic tradition and continental tradition, but also can be tracked back to some of the ideas mentioned by two important scientists, Luria and Vygotsky, and their principle of extracortical organization of complex mental functions. Their concept implies that mental functions, higher mental functions, are often formed by support of external auxiliary tools like pen and paper. And maybe it will be a slight extension on their view if I would say that autobiographical narrative that we compose in many, many ways is part of that, is that kind of tool. So it creates the self as a useful illusion and connects self across moments in time. So how does this solve the puzzle cases I described before? Well, first, it denies the requirement of numerical identity for survival and responsibility.
원래
It also denies the necessity of having only one successor. So in fact, I do believe that I can be in multiple places, some years later. So there could be multiple successes. And according to the narrative approach, person persists if his narrative persists and it integrates new parts. It also implies that a person as a unified numerical agent persisting in time is a fiction. But it is a useful fiction, which helps us to interpret and predict a behavior of a human. So what is my conclusion? I talked about personal identity. I explained what is the problem of personal identity in modern analytic Russian philosophy. And I've also explained the three main approaches. I think I have shown that these approaches were wrong based on the thought experiments that also that justify it. And I explained the fourth alternative to the philosophical riddle, that is a narrative approach. This approach can be grounded in the ideas of Russian scientists and it avoids some of the philosophical puzzles. Thank you.
Yes.
About self, I think over 3,000 years, people gradually develop interest or curiosity. And then now, those theories or philosophy or concept of creator, this very life created by God. So, in the West, they call soul created by God. So quite simple. No need much complication. Ask God. Then, you see, the ancient Indian sort of concept, life after life, life more or less natural, no creation, creator. So then, the Buddhist question, previous life, come this life, from this life, next life. So body, mind which is related with this body, obviously not come from previous life and will not go next life. So they develop a concept of Atma, which is completely separate from this body.
Independent, yeah.
Independent.
So in Tibetan, we actually explain this, talking about the non-Buddhist. Yeah, in the kind of Indian text, this particular Atman or soul or eternal principle of the self is characterized as being eternal or permanent, unchanging, and unitary and independent. So three main attributes of this.
Oh. So then, Buddha come. Buddha say, no. Kedi phungbu daayi na, kedi jibu shen dujur. Kedi phungbu damle shen, phungbu senyi mewa jur sen. Da di dom jik gyon yu zane, dorang na role, daji shawa dugi sen. Tene dawar gyurwa yin. Duji phungbu di tong des. Tera daani yoma yin.
So,
Wana, daa kyone mewa resla na. Eni, chidayan la chano na, teni shingda joba daras, tishin phungbu nam teni, kuzo simchi joba yin.
So Buddha was a dissenter to this mainstream received view of the notion of self as an eternal, unitary, independent entity, and Buddha rejected the notion and explained that how, in fact, this grasping at self is at the root of all of our problems. And in fact, the notion of self is like the thought of the evil thought. So liberation really is a function of gaining insight into the absence of that. Then the question is raised, in that case, there's no person, what about the sentient beings? And then Buddha gave the metaphor of a chariot. A chariot is made up of parts, and based on the certain configuration of the parts, we give the label chariot, and it performs the functions of a chariot. So in the same way, on the basis of the aggregation of physical and mental processes, the term sentient being or a person is attributed. So that was the Buddha's answer.
So that, at the same way, the 당시 세계에서 다 샤카고 싶을 때부터 티 부불이 되는 셔베 다시도 녀올지고.
So we see that, for example, even from the neuroscientific point of view, if we were to think in terms of what is the self, and if you kind of engage in that kind of inquiry with the premise that there should be something that is findable, that is somehow has a self-standing identity and independent, then we run into a problem. So even the scientific and the Western philosophical analysis is showing that this assumptions, this premise, looking for some kind of eternal, self-definable self is a problem.
So within the Buddhist school of thought, there are four major schools of thought: Vivasek, Transplanting, Chitta-mantra, and madhyamaka. The madhyamaka nalole tanyado rangze shevado mishiv niche. The tanyado rangze shengegi the umobane songchegi nang rangde samologi kansa senshi yigi namshi gane shayungyari.
So within the four schools of Buddhist, philosophical thought, the madhyamaka is the most advanced one, and within madhyamaka there are two main subsets, sub-schools. So most of the Buddhist schools, they settle on a position that personal identity should be based upon some notion of the continuity of mental faculty, the mental consciousness.
So the madhyamaka, the other one, is tanyado rangze mishivati.
So the final school is a madhyamaka that rejects the notion of something objective, intrinsically real entity, even on a conventional level. They reject that idea at all, completely.
가서 지안도 계속게 좀어줘. 뚜줍 사야지 계속게 좀어줘. 당고. 가. 고불루르고 싸우시는 날이야. 아니 떼진저버 중앙강. 되는 동관이듯이. 되네 때네 다고디 뒤니 우면라면 놓스. 때네 딱과 인주잖아. 때네 수잖아. 원이 주듯이. 당듯이. 때네 딱스도 딱벌거네 예버디. 찬듯이. 매듯이. 저들이 이제 딱지가 타인들 저 우면람데 땡중 그 대코나니고 고야 되는 거래스.
So this position is actually very well captured in a passage in Nagarjuna's own text where he talks about how everything that is dependently originated.
가사데 근시견을 give 대마지 될 계획을 예마이 견을 락래 칸데 동버시 근시 뚱니시데 박유인스.
So the Nagarjuna's actually on this particular kind of passage is based in turn on a passage from the Buddha's scripture sutra where Buddha talks about how
너 그거를 신기해. 너 띵은지 죠.
So it's in a Mahayana sutra. So Nagarjuna says that whatever is dependently originated is empty, and this things that are empty are dependently designated or labeled, and this I call the true middle way. So the notion of dependence rejects anything that involves the idea of some kind of absolute eternal real existence, and then the notion of designation, kind of prevents one from falling into the nihilism, saying that nothing exists. So it's in this way the notion of middle way, that is neither falling into extreme of absolutism or extreme of annihilation, nihilism. Yeah, annihilation.
Now, quantum physics, as far as material thing is concerned, nothing objectively exists. Finally, depend on observer. So long observer there, things there. No longer observer, things not there. That is semzabe.
So this particular kind of insight from the quantum physics.
남들 가래거든.
렌치밍을랑.
가래 남의 책을 그래. 책 텐지 미국 예배실 뭐도 달로 샤마이. dit 가리 책을. 남게래. 취지하고요. 저 남게.
So for this particular insight from quantum physics really almost exactly mirrors idea in a Buddhist text by Dharmakirti, the 7th century, epistemologist, where he talks about how the perception of the blue and the content blue are simultaneous. You cannot reduce one to the other.
차선 지dun가니 셔탐절로 다 수징 셔드지 샘티 당니지스 수모든 좀 자직사시고 송지 자타데가 동 송지 이동 때고는 셔버티 섬섬에 다做.
So this particular standpoint, referred to as the mind-only standpoint, rejects any objectivity to the physical world that we experience. So it's a form of mentalism.
다 우모벌 레드잖아요. 섬섬에 따와디 셔지생에게 우모지기 열어라. 우모지기 다 섬섬에 그 치유기다 셔디디 가다 섬근당 셔섬체 섬디 된주 셔야지. 다 디바까지. 어다가다 치송이네리 나은즈베이네리 니가로 아니 때는 딱섬 마도 뭐 주요 말이지.
So the madhyamaka actually, because the Chittamatra, the mind-only school, rejects the notion of objectivity to the external world, but they tend to somehow reify the internal world of experience, the subjective world of mind. But madhyamaka rejects even that. So, the madhyamaka doesn't make a distinction in terms of reality between the external world and the internal world of experience, and rejects any notion of objective existence to both.
Now, real question is now, what is use using that kind of theory? Just theory? If may I say so, the scientist, just a theory. Now, in Buddhism, this theory, you see, use as an antidote of fundamental ignorance. Fundamental ignorance is, you see, we grasping. 다 전쟁원에 여버지 나용이요. 나왔다도 전쟁원에 주을 때된 걸로 즉 아택은 좀버들 덴진스기요래. 다디 양로룩 슝디 베세버다. 되게 하나 다시 저 뒤심 사대다 나와요래. 저 루룩한테 슝디 레던 요모 세베 탈. 레던 요모 남돌래. 디 남도서야디 덴직 남도 멤버셔. 남도서야디 취미이직 남도. 디 천지고도 볼라 되게 다른 식도. 취미이직 남도 쪼다니. 지금 이동하지는 쉬우지 이동하래스. 8년에 여대버지 이동만 8년에 여대버지 삼단인데 그 땜바 아택이 이동하지. 다가는 이동 명하지 뭐 이내 그 유진원에 미도버 땜바지 피게 다 나용결 나왔다도 주어 때인데 아택은 좀 어떻게도 와. 자상가 취미이직 남도기 녀몽기게 하래스. 녀몽게 레서게 하래스. 근데 취미이직 남도디 덴지게 잡아려 중하래스. 빼면서 세버셔. 야오 쉬우지다디. 대자절 저번에 동번이진 가본 줄 알았어. 다들 냠좀 싸고래. 동번이진 거기도 가면 누가 나서 동번이 있으니 땅다 치달라고요. 꼭 모두 다 섬이야. 뒤고 구조 되기도 못다. 다들 광고로 와. 다들 뒤중 거 싫어. 섬중 거 싫어. 곰중 거 싫어. 냠좀 깨요나. 아니 갈래를 섬을 이거 딴전도 줘야지.
So in the
저 나야디 계시 책임에도 대부분도 싸봐야 디나는 공부 쉬다. 냠냠 그러지 이해되었을지.
So in the Buddhist context, this is not just theorizing. Actually, this insight into the absence of intrinsic existence of everything is really seen as a powerful insight that counteracts a source of much of our problem. Because the source of much of our problem really lies, according to Buddhist understanding, is in a form of a naive grasping at things as they appear to us. When we, in our naive perception of the world tends to appear as if they're existing out there, real, solid, on its own, without any connection to us. And our emotional reaction follows that kind of perception. And the perception is based on this objective reality, and our emotional response is followed by this. So this is really powerfully captured in one of Nagarjuna's own text, where he talks about how, if you look at the harmful behavior in the 18th chapter of his main treatise on the Middle Way, he says if we examine, much the various negative actions that we engage in, they actually tend to be triggered by certain emotional reactivity. And if you look at the emotional reactivity, they tend to be based on some kind of some element of distortion or falsification of the information that we have about the world. And if that kind of falsification and distortion ultimately is rooted in a grasping at some kind of objective existence. And this grasping can be then eliminated by the insight into emptiness. And that's why this insight into emptiness is seen as a very important point. And His Holiness was therefore telling the monks here, monastic colleagues here, that this is why teasing them. This is why we speak of different stages of understanding. The initial stage of understanding based on study and hearsay, and then the second level of understanding, which is really understanding based on critical reflection, something that you yourself organize.
Vipassana, analytical meditation. Analyze.
And then the final third stage of understanding is the experiential understanding. So it is only in this way a real change can take place. So, the monks may use the word emptiness 1,000, 10,000 times, but if it is not internalized, it wouldn't have the effect. So His Holiness was therefore saying that this monk Lama who talked about how the geshis are an embodiment of colorful words, but when it comes to substance, they're almost empty. So His Holiness is saying that he has always tried to make sure that he doesn't fall into that category of geshis.
So now, you see, number of occasions, I said they express, of course, scientists. Those scientists or quantum physicists who not only intellectually sort of understand, but truly believe or nothing objectively exists, or they mainly external thing. Such scientists, quantum physicists, who really believe that, then I think their emotion could be less. So recent, Tanizanga distance, Demichigan, Taiwan Marvel, Taiwan Demichigan article t-shirts. The Ningdu Chik Pina Joseph Tons. T-shirt, quantum physics, Kazoda, the Kazo, using the two Mavachigi. Didn't Gita Kanda easy singing the Yuji Namsha, touching to somebody, touching to Yabari said, the doors new young doors. Logical doors. That you would tensing the 6th Mindumato, tensing a lot of doors, shook doors. In this session.
His Holiness was saying that he recently read kind of a synopsis of a paper that was originally written in Chinese. He read
I think Taiwanese.
And the paper was about observation made by someone of people who have really taken to heart the insight of quantum physics. And those who have really tried to kind of, embody this and think through carefully, his observation was that among those people, there seems to be less fixation on a kind of a more fundamentalist ideas of black and white. This must be it. So that kind of, rigid grasping seemed to be less.
I think yesterday I briefly mentioned one of my friend, one American, one scientist, very old, now almost 100 years old.
Yeah, he's a cognitive behavior therapy. Aaron Beck, Dr.
Aaron Beck, yes, Aaron Beck. When I first met him, then his age 84. Then my last sort of call on him, then 97. So I was told, you see, he's still alive. So he few decades history also helping those patients who much disturbed their mind due to anger. And he found the angry person, the object which they feel anger, appears something very negative. Actually, 90% of that negativeness is mental projection. That's the
So this point Aaron Beck is raising about how disproportionate percentage of that negative perception is really exaggeration. The projection from the person's mind seems to jive really well with what Nagarjuna is talking about, how at the root of our negative emotions lies this kind of falsification and distortion.
So those scientists, there is no need except next life or heaven or hell. No need botheration. But this very life, you see, in order to develop more peaceful mind, usually the real destroyer of peace of mind is anger, attachment. Anger entirely based on attachment. So these two are real destroyer of our peace of mind. And through that way, eventually destroy our physical health and family happiness and the community's happiness. So just in order to build a happy individual, happy family, happy community, this theory, I feel, some relevant. So we Buddhists, you see, meditate on this theory in order to achieve Buddhahood. So you no need that way thinking. Just how to reduce your raw the emotions. Like that. Thank you.
Your Holiness, thank you very much for sharing.
While
So although we speak of all phenomena having no objective reality and it's all being designations and labels, but when you're hungry, it is real.
So we have a lunch break now. Thank you, all of you, and we meet at 1 o'clock for the next session.
Okay.